Various reports say there could be social media influencer fatigue. Is this true, and could it shift marketing spend back to traditional media? When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it was unknown territory for journalists. Now, some studies say reporting was rather alarmist. We chat about that too today. And lastly, we meet a 12-year-old radio broadcaster. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. My name is Naledi Mulewa. This is where we look at the intersection between media and audiences. Now, of course, this show is not complete without your say, so connect with us via our social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed you. Hashtag SABC Media and Society, or take this number down because this is where you give us a call, 011-714-6841 or 6842. Welcome back. So the State of Influencer Marketing Report for 2022 says that 49% of Instagram influencer accounts were impacted by fraud in 2021. It's also highlighted that influencer marketing is also affected by increasing spend on ad blocking tools by organizations and individuals. There's a lot there to unpack, but some worry, of course, that information from strangers on the internet may not be trustworthy because of the likes of widely publicized fraudsters, like the likes of the Twitter swindler. So there are even reports suggesting that there could be what's called influencer fatigue. But how true is this? And does this suggest a return to the trust for traditional media and letting go of social media influencers for advertisers and marketers? Well, joining me to discuss this, we are joined by Vincent Zondo from DNA Brand Architects and Janae Nell, who is the head of sales at Webfluential. Thank you so much for joining us, and we really do appreciate your time. Vincent, I'm going to start with you. We had that package really, setting the tone for us. But I think it's important to start from the very beginning. We've got those that are BBT, born before technology, wondering what on earth, what is an influencer and how do you determine that one is an influencer? Yeah,
I think the term influencer, has been there since the ages. If you grew up anywhere, like I grew up Gwandebele in Mpumalanga, the street that has the good shoe, the goody two-shoe sort of like kid, and your mother would be like, you need to be like Umdwana next door, like that family, they seem to have it all together. So influence has always been there, I think in terms of those seem to be doing right by society or by societal and maybe social standards, particularly. It's just that the issue now is that obviously with the rise of digital, we are finding that the good kid from next door now has a platform of 10,000 followers, and he's influencing that 10,000. So that's the term influencer. Basically,
It's an interesting choice of words you use, though, because essentially what you're saying is it's the good kid on the block that has the influence, right? And we've seen that in our own societies. But when it comes to social media, that sort of ethical standard isn't really there. And I think, Janae, this is where we can bring you in. Good morning to you. Thank you for giving us time this morning. Your understanding of what influencers really is. Vincent essentially saying that it's the good kid on the block, the one with influence. But we've seen some influencers doing some very unethical things. So how do you, as someone who analyzes this landscape, understand what an influencer is? I know people that have 5,000 followers and immediately think that they are influencers. At what point does one become one?
Well, I think it varies. I think as someone that sells influencers to brands, there's various levels. You have someone like me who's a nano influencer, so I use certain products in my daily life, and certain companies would sell my profile as a nano influencer. And then you get those sort of, like you're saying, people with a couple thousand followers. Those are mid-tier influencers. They've got some sort of social media following, typically a little bit more credible when it comes to promoting brands. And then you've got your sort of macro and mega influencers And I think it's also important to note that every country has a different standard of influencers, you know. So what the USA considers a macro influencer is by no means a macro in South Africa. So we also need to be clear in terms of what country we're speaking to.
Yeah, in South Africa, I'm keen to hear what that sort of zoning in really looks like in South Africa, but particularly also just the waves that social media influencing has taken over the last few years. Yeah. I mean, if you look at pre-COVID-19, it was aspirational
very much so,
to become an influencer. Then I remember at the beginning of 2020, when the pandemic was starting, there was a lot of conversation about, oh, this is the death of the social media influencer. Let's talk about those waves.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to actually note is, and I think this is the challenge where we find ourselves, the influencer space hasn't for the longest time been regulated. And I think regulated in terms of from those who say, I am an influencer, to your point, 5,000, I'm now an influencer, to the brand manager who's going to put 50K for a 5,000 rand followed individual. So the space is largely very unregulated, and I think everyone makes their rules as they go along, which is a bit of a challenge, and I think that's what causes a lot of these in-betweeners, and you're finding a lot of fraudsters. So in South Africa, really, I think it depends on the type of brand that you are and the space that you are trying to talk to. Numbers we've seen don't necessarily mean influence. I think it's more things like engagement, it's more things like conversion, which is a big thing. So I think in South Africa, yes, there might have been that cry, but we all saw there was actually the rise of the influencer economy. And when I say economy in terms of those who are saying something, their numbers, and they've got a huge following, and they're getting huge rands, for them to go out. I mean, I think pre-COVID, guys were charging like 10K per tweet, but now that yes, that number has, quite grown. But I think also we shouldn't look at it in isolation. I think it's always a campaign, and there's a start and an end, and no case is the same. I could come to you tomorrow and say, hey, I've got brand X and I've got 20,000 rand. I just need you to maybe do a story for me, and you will take that. There's no rule that
would be unethical journalism, but that's okay. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in journalism, we've got those. I think and we've seen the social media networks try to put it like now you have to, disclaimer to say it's an ad if you are an influencer and you are promoting. It's all efforts to try and regulate the space. But the biggest challenge is actually still in the boardroom, because I come to you, producer A, and I say, or you say rather, I want you to come speak because I want to raise either my eyeballs. I say, well, I want 50K for an interview. That is some form of influence in a way, but the cost is then determined between me and the producer if there's a budget, or in the boardroom it's between me and the marketing manager who says, I've got 5,000 rand, I would like X amount of influencers, and maybe I can just get them to do one thing.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out though in that discussion, and I think as someone who operates in the news and current affairs space, it's important to point out that what Vincent is talking about is really mainstream media and those kind of advertorial agreements and memorandums of understanding, but we're not talking about news and current affairs, because that is what we'd call unethical behavior, and we need to highlight that so South Africans know the difference, right?
Indeed.
I'm going to come back to you, Janae. Vincent has talked about the economy of influencer marketing, and what you've done is you've actually done quite a bit of research into where ad spend really is going. So where advertisers are wanting to boost their eyeballs, as Vincent calls it, are they leaning more towards influencer marketing, or are they starting to come back home to traditional media?
So yeah, I guess that's the main question about the whole sort of conversation we're having today. So I must say, during COVID, we were very lucky in our industry that we did see a lot of traditional spend shifting, because within our sort of agency, we have got more traditional agencies or spaces, media spaces too. And we did see those sort of like out of home areas, billboards struggling because people weren't on the road. So we saw a huge influx in budget because everyone was digital. But we have seen that growth continue. We haven't seen the growth, sort of the finances disappear from the influencer marketing category yet. We do suspect it will keep growing for at least another 2-3 years. And to put it into perspective, a couple of years ago when I started in the space, We needed to go and beg clients, give us a chance. Let us show you what we can do. Let us show you what influencers can do for you. And now we're in a position where, brands are coming to us. We're on what we call media buying schedules. We don't need to hustle them for, please, give us 50,000 Rand. Let's try and do something for you. We're actually on these schedules. So and social media influencers have become part of the marketing mix. They're not just, a nice to have anymore.
Yeah, I want to take some calls because ultimately we can have Janae and Vincent sharing their thoughts, but what matters really is what the viewer's doing, right? As consumers of media and even social media, who are you more likely to trust when you're getting information from brands, any sort of information at all? And are you starting to take that trust back from influencers and give it back to traditional media, or is it the other way around? Give us a call on 011-714-6841. Again, 011-714-6841 or 6842. So do you ever purchase products because a social media influencer recommended it? I know I certainly have, right? Yeah. Let's look at the patterns. I think there still has been a lot of understanding that needs to be done around Tick-Tock.
Yeah.
But has that app not taken the world by storm? Right now, have corporate companies and advertisers really started to understand Tick-Tock influencers and what they're doing?
Absolutely. I think and this again goes to the, as technology develops and these platforms develop, there's a lot of effort to try understand them in that way in terms of their power to influence, who are then the key players in that space. Ultimately, we're moving into a space where now we are calling there were key opinion leaders beyond influencers in terms of the space, like with yourself, potentially it would be around this space of media and things. So you are a key opinion leader. And then it goes deeper. You might then be a key culture leader in terms of, yes, you are a key opinion leader within the advertising and media space, but then you then move into much more an ingrown sort of like section where it's a lot more focused. So I think as technology develops, we are trying to figure out then the influence in terms of how scaled up or scaled down it would be in those new platforms. And that's why TikTok, there was a lot of trying it out and there was a lot of engagement around that. But also now the big question is, can the TikTok influencer convert?
Yeah, listen, we've seen DNA architects programs and brands, right? And some of your campaigns. I really don't want to get into some of the brands that you work with, but really go online, Google DNA architects, and you're able to see, the ads. In fact, they go viral. They make South Africans laugh. That's the reality. Yeah. So do you start in your brand strategy with social media first? That's essentially what I'm talking about. When you structure a campaign, it's social going to be on TV first?
I think maybe in closing on this platform matter, you see, for me, and a huge part of my team, and particularly my mentor and CEO, Sylvester Chauke, at DNA brand, it's really less about the media. It's the message is now the hero. I may start, like recently did a campaign where it was a global brand, but the kickstart of the conversation of the campaign had to start online with an influencer. Yes, it was still radio, but we were much more targeting the personality. By that time, it was what led the campaign before, the traditional TV broke. But I think it's quite important to also mention that, particularly with the way we approach it, digital as a space, and we'd look at the message in terms of what is the audience that we're trying to talk to and how effectively we need to reach them. But it's part of the mix. It neither replaces the traditional or it's either one or the other. But I think the key thing is that digital influencer, even social PR as we would call it, would be part of the mix. But in the traditional space, you just only find almost like the traditional. With the rise of the influencer, we've had to also think quite smartly. And as Shena mentioned earlier, in terms of elements around the media booking, now your media might start with, yes, TV will still be part of it, radio will still be part of it, but you might find that we've got a proper scheduling around, we've got this influencer who will either break this part of the campaign ahead. So it's been part of the mix, and I think it's now, over time, legitimize these new entrants into the marketing mix, which would be TV, radio, and print, which were mainly traditional and trusted.
Yeah, what what you can't deny is that for anyone who's running a business and wants to really build that traffic towards their brand, it really is quite appealing.
Absolutely.
The idea of going towards an influencer. But perhaps, Janae, we need to start talking about what corporates, what small to medium and even large businesses really need to be on the lookout for when choosing influencers. Because again, there's the alignment to your brand, but surely there has to be some responsibility around what that influencer actually represents, right?
For sure. So I think, let me start with your previous question and wrap it up to where you've ended. So
Sure.
Just in terms of bringing in TikTok into this question too, so we are TikTok's creative partner in South Africa, meaning we've got their top 300 creators registered with us. So we've really helped TikTok as a platform launch in South Africa. And it's very important that it's actually not seen as a social media channel. TikTok itself is an entertainment channel. And I think brands and people need to start seeing it that way. If we're going to try and have a traditional ad running on TikTok, typically let's call it an unboxing scene when influencer unwraps a pretty gift. That's not what TikTok is about. TikTok is really all about, they call it a flawsedness. So it's around making sure that you let the influencers be who they are. It's not around trying to be, as prettified as what Instagram is, for example. It's also the only platform that's 100%, you've got the people's focus. So you've got their eyes, you've got their ears. It's a sound on platform. Think about it. How often do you watch Instagram or Facebook or sound on? Not nearly as much as when people are consuming TikTok. So it's very important that when a brand is trying to be on the TikTok space, that they allow the influencers to be the creators, and that they incorporate the brands in a very authentic way. You then also just touched on that return on investment. And that is also a huge change that's come in the influencer marketing space. It used to be very much awareness driven. So like you said, using big influencers, try and, reach their 2 million audience with a specific brand. And what we've seen change is we actually don't spend that much of our clients' budget on content anymore. We actually take this content and we turn it into ads, making that fake audience, as you guys were referring it to, less important, because we're using the person, like you mentioned, to make sure it's the right person for the fit. So there are no scandals, for example. The person is the same sort of brand fit that the brand is looking for. They're the right sort of personality. And we have them create content on behalf of the brand. And then through performance media, we promote that content, and it can actually be served to the brand specific target audience by age, by gender, by income, etc. So it's become very scientific. It's actually not as sort of awareness driven as what it used to be back in the day. And then just in terms of that return on investment, as you mentioned, through these ads, we can now actually, report to our clients based on, let's talk about cost per install. So I can, tell my client, I came in at 20 Rand, per install that I've driven for you through my influencer content. And just to put it into perspective, usually we see through that trusted referral, as you guys mentioned, that we're generally beating what the client is doing on their side because it's a trusted referral.
Yeah, that's what I find. What stands out about what you've just said, Janae, particularly, is what you say, how you really choose that influencer and making sure that they don't have a scandal.
Yeah.
Because that essentially is the lesson for the young people that want to be influencers, because it is becoming a career path, but they need to think about that. So are there influencers that are simply not sellable to brands? And what causes that? So what are the things that young influencers need to be aware of or careful of?
Yeah, this reminds me actually a few times where a brand has an influencer or rather an advocate, because obviously there's a difference, advocacy or ambassador in our case, and we've done it in a couple of brands like Telkom Consumer, where you find the traditional, and we've borrowed very much at the SABC with that traditional trusted voice, because for a Telkom, which is a mature sort of like brand in South Africa, they do need someone, not just influence and advocacy, but someone who really would understand, the likes of Mamdudu Koza, etc. on Ukozi. But what we have found is that when a ambassador, influencer, lead influencer has a scandal, a lot of brands will then immediately drop them.
Yes, we've seen this.
We've seen this happen. But also we've seen a lot of brands take them back, which is also
Well,
begs
there's
the
the
question.
comeback story, yes.
Yes, yeah. But generally, you do try and make sure, because you are talking about brand and it's all about this process of influencing, you do want your protagonist to be as clean as possible. There's funny anecdotes like one influencer, famous singer called and said, "Oh, I don't eat lechapa." And a couple of years ago, then his brand that wanted him to be their lead face and influencer released a flavor in that way. It's things like those, and it's quite tongue-in-cheek, but sometimes it can get quite, quite strong in terms of, especially when it comes to a lot more of the consumer behavior and shifting. I think the audience is a lot more aware now in terms of that there is an influence process that's taking place. So they are taking the information and they're scrutinizing it a lot more. And there's this assumption, obviously, I think that customers are not as smart, and I think in the boardroom, brand managers, marketeers, and key people in the media and agency side, they're starting to realize that it's quite important to do that research, because you don't want to end on the other side. And there's something that is a bit glaring, and as we call it, Black Twitter will always remind you, because it never really forgets. So it's quite important to do that.
And that's the reality, is influencers use social media as their platforms, but what they put out there never ever goes away and might come back to bite them for brands. Janae, I'm going to just close this discussion off with you. Just as we wrap it up, your final thoughts on how influencers really can protect themselves against fraudulent behavior, which has come up quite a few times, and then perhaps the symbiotic relationship between mainstream media and online media, and really how both industries can help each other out, especially in getting to your money, that is the advertiser.
Yeah, perfect. So I think just to touch base then on, what can influencers do? So as someone that is choosing influencers for my client to put forward to them, like we mentioned, scandal, be careful of that. Be careful of too many selfies. I find so many people you look at their profile and it's just selfies. And it's like, how am I meant to sell this person to my client if I can't see who you are? It's really around showing your personality and what you stand for and what you do and what you like, what you don't like. Those kind of things need to come across on influencers' timelines, because that really will have the brand understand, is this the type of person that we want to link up with? And lastly, just competing brands, so also make sure that when you do take on a brand that you genuinely want to work with a brand. And we've touched on this previously, make sure that it's a brand that you're happy to work with and potentially want to do long-term, because know that when you take on a specific brand, competing brands aren't going to want to work with you, at least for in a period of 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's just, that whole thing around making sure we're not overselling someone or overusing someone, and that it remains authentic at the end of the day. Yeah. And then, just in terms of the different media spaces can work together, it's just all around making sure we all play around the same messaging. So what happens on digital mustn't be completely different to what's being said and the look and feel that's happening on billboards and on TV, for example. So often as the creative agencies, we are part of the briefings, so we do the same and deliver the same messaging
across
as what
spectrums.
The rest of the campaign is delivering. So influencer marketing mustn't be seen as something or channel that's running by itself and not part of the entire marketing strategy.
Janae, thank you so much for speaking to us. An absolute pleasure having you on the show. Janae Nell there from Wordfluential, especially just wrapping up that discussion and talk. I think she gave us, in fact, some expansion into the media space, right? That one doesn't have to operate aside from the other, and that social media and mainstream media can work together. Vincent Zondo, thank you so much for speaking to us from DNA Architects. Let's take a short break. We're back in a moment.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Welcome back. So when South Africa's first case of COVID-19 was first reported in Hilton outside Pietermaritzburg in March 2020, suddenly, you may remember this, the president became a norm on our TV screens. The period that was to follow also saw an increase of audiences of news media because everybody wanted an update. But did the increase in numbers see an increase in trust in the information being shared by news outlets. Well, we asked you what you had to think about how media covered COVID-19. Take a look.
To be bridged because a lot of people didn't understand some of the terms that were coming in. Other radio stations like Ukhozi FM, Ikwekwezi FM tried, but they were still pulling those big terms.
I don't believe that the media was giving us enough information because we could see videos on social media of people saying that I'm at a hospital, but then we don't have so much facts.
Information that was relayed from the media, it was impactful to an extent, but they're still keeping us out the loop. It's just my personal point of view. I mean, more information relayed can actually benefit us.
Media to start whole, but like body radio, body TV.
Like we had no say on it, or something that was happening actually. So how they put it is like, yo, there's this now, yeah, we gotta be vaccinated, this and that. So how it came to me, I didn't trust it at first.
Yeah, very diverse views there, and you can be part of the conversation as well. Give us a call on 011-714-6841. So are you happy with how the media covered the COVID-19 pandemic? We are finally out of the state of disaster. Let's have that reflective conversation. And of course, do so on Twitter as well. Hashtag SABC Media and Society. That number again, 011-714-6841. So the conversation.com says South African front page stories about COVID-19 were sensationalist and unhelpful. Their research further found that reporting about the pandemic was negative in tone and used fearful words and metaphors. But during the height of the pandemic, a huge number of journalists also contracted the coronavirus through being in hospital wards and communities on the front line in general. Some even died. To discuss COVID and journalists and how we did over the past 2 years, I'm joined by Professor Wallace Khuma from the University of Cape Town. We're also joined by SANEF Project Manager, Mr. Hopewell Khatebe. Mr. Khatebe, a good afternoon to you, or morning rather. Thank you so much for giving us your time. It's an important reflective discussion, right, as we move into where we are now as a country post state of disaster. How did South Africa, in fact, fare, South African media, in your view, fare with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I think I am very happy to know that the professors around universities were kind enough to sort of gauge our work as the media to see how we have performed. I have my reservations about their choice of scope. I would have liked them to do an overall assessment of how we performed. I feel the pick and choosing, but I have a bone to pick with the prof when we get there. But I think it was great. It was fearful. And they reflect that. They say we reflected that a fearful state of situation. I think sometimes when people look in the mirror and they see a pimple, they should not break the mirror. There is a pimple, you have to deal with it, you know. So I think that's
quite an analogy.
Exactly. My view then is therefore that the good professor should have looked and say South Africa media reflected the situation at the time accurately. And I went through their study roughly, quickly, but I think there's nowhere where they said we were inaccurate as the media, which is a wonderful thing. They don't say that we peddled, lied, and fake news. We did not do that. If anything, they do reflect that there were instances where we fought fake news and we tended to correct it. So for me, that's a good start. So we can then debate on the issue of the front page, because for me, it's a different take altogether.
Yeah, well, we'll get to the front page. I want to talk about the pimple in the mirror for a second, right? And Prof, I'll bring you in here. Good morning to you. Thanks for giving us your time. I remember at the height of level 5, you know, at the very beginning of this pandemic where things were quite scary, as a journalist being out in the streets where the streets were completely empty, it was frightening. I mean, just at the top of the discussion to set the tone, where you place South Africa's media performance of the coverage of the pandemic.
Hello, is that me?
Yes, Prof, the question is for you. Did you hear it?
Oh, yes. Hi. Thanks a lot, Prof, for the invitation. And thanks a lot, Hopewell. I hear you. So maybe some bit of context matters here. My colleagues and I started this study right at the time when the first lockdown was introduced. So we looked at front page newspapers for the period of 3 months between the 1st of March and the 30th of May. So yes, it was the very first stages of the pandemic, and the streets were empty, and these pandemics don't happen every year, maybe in every generation. So there was that sense of uncertainty and fear, et cetera, in society. We do not indict the media for that at all. What we set out to do was to have an exploratory study of the ways in which the pandemic was covered by the media, and we sort of withdrew the tropes, the themes, just to sort of basic exploration of the things that were sort of popping up in the media coverage. We looked at 11 South African media newspapers online, English language newspapers, I must also say. So our sample was quite limited also in terms of the focus being on front pages. So if you look at those limits that come with the samples that we made, then of course some of the criticisms will be taken into context. But that's sort of the background that informed our study. And of course the findings were, and as we wrote in the conversation piece, there was a great deal of alarmism, fear. There was the war metaphor that was prevalent. Most of the sources were government officials, which probably makes sense at the time. But also we found that most of the ordinary people on the ground did not feature as primary sources of news. Most of the sources were male. I could go on and on about the study, but I must also say it was not an attempt to sort of judge whether the media did right or wrong. I mean, those were circumstances that were novel to many people, to society. But also, like you said, rightfully so, journalists were impacted as well. They didn't just cover COVID-19, they lived it. You know, some of them lost their lives. So I must just clarify that this was not an indictment of the media at all. We just tried to draw attention to what was out there in the media.
Yeah. This is really a conversation about tone, isn't it? I mean, as we have this conversation, we're running some images of headlines there that read the horror, or the COVID death storm. And at the time, in 2020, in fact, 2021 as well, when we were seeing very high death rates, this is what it felt like. But do you think that we were being irresponsible? I mean, the professor there talking about how we used war tones in some of those times. I mean, and at what point did we then measure what is sensationalist, right?
Yeah. I think it's like one man's meat is another man's poison kind of a situation. But the prof does accept that it was the reflection of the situation at the time. Even the tone was appropriate because remember, we were quoting the president, we were quoting the Minister of Health, we were quoting all the experts that constituted the Coronavirus Council, right? And by the way, the fact that it was mostly male people that were quoted, that reflective of the administration of the president at the moment. And also the scientific world, it means there are two males there, too many males that we had to reflect. Otherwise, we would have been lying, and then we're starting to find our own sources from outside. Hence, I mentioned the point of accuracy. That means if we accurately reflected and they can read out of this reflection that there were too many male voices, then it's the situation of our country. The media cannot change.
Yeah, let's bring in the voices of some of our viewers here. Hashtag media, SABC Media and Society, if you'd like to be part of the conversation, or give us a call. That number 011-714-6841. Let's look at some of the tweets that have come in now. We have one from Mo Sheikh who says, most definitely not. Media's role was to brainwash the masses and success was achieved. Think about it. That's the view of South Africans, that our job was to brainwash South Africans. I mean, Prof, what do you make of that tweet? And I know that during the COVID pandemic, we certainly saw a lot of that. And I wonder if that is really countered by the wave of fake news that we also saw at the same time, and the fear mongering on social media.
Thanks. I'm not sure if there is merit to to the argument that the media's role was to brainwash South Africans. I mean, I don't think readers and viewers are that easily brainwashed. But yes, there was a great deal of fake news and misinformation. In fact, the WHO, raised the issue of what they refer to as the infodemic. So this happened right at the onset of the pandemic. There was a great deal of fake news and misinformation deliberately. What we found out was when we did our study, we also looked at two of the 18 variables we had. So in one variable, we looked at health information prevalence in the story. We looked at in each individual story and looked at the extent to which it provided basic information about health. That's one. Two, we looked at whether the story sought to debunk misinformation, et cetera, so deliberately so, because there was a great deal of that. Unfortunately, we found that in terms of both health information and as well as debunking myths around the pandemic, the South African media did not, they fared quite badly. I don't have the statistics with me right now. I think up to 80% of the stories did not provide background health information. Of course, you could say, well, we're looking at front page stories and they hardly have the time and scope to do that. That's fine. It's a limitation that we can accept. But in terms of just basically looking at the stories, there wasn't much background information about the pandemic, just to educate readers and viewers about that. But also there wasn't sort of a deliberate attempt by the news media to debunk misinformation that was out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And perhaps you'd like to respond to that, Mr. Khatebe, but I know that we should also talk about the impact of COVID-19, particularly on journalists themselves. I mean, we talked about having lost our colleagues. The journalists themselves were hard hit by the pandemic. And there was their mental health as well, the exposure to all the death and destruction they saw.
Let me start with what the professor said too. I think the first thing that I have noticed that when you deal with front pages, you are always not going to find all the answers. As a person who's been a news editor, you will then write in the story below that there is more information on page so-and-so and page so-and-so, and analysis on page so-and-so. The research says there was no in-depth analysis. You can never find an in-depth analysis on the 600 words on the front page if you are a tabloid, or 900 words when we are a spreadsheet. Therefore, that's why then you would then say, reference this, reference that. So I think they may have made a mistake, or at least I think they made a mistake of not saying that we refer to information inside, because it's like looking at one puzzle and then wanting to then brand everything based on the one puzzle, which is the front page. The newspapers were very adamant or insisting on making references on that. Even when the time came, I think it was 3 or 4 months later, outside the scope of their research, that there were now people who are other professors who are schooled, who were coming with different view of what the government should do as an alternative. And because they also said we didn't offer alternatives and so on, and solutions to the earth. You can't do that on the front page. That's why we have the insight for that, and so on. So I beg to differ. I did say I have a bone to pick with that research when it comes to expecting everything on the front page. But maybe they are calling for a different view on how we approach the front page, and maybe the story should be able to give the analogy, give the what you call it, the story itself, and then mention immediately on the second or third page and say, you'll find the details inside. But we usually, and we have not diverted from making cross-reference to that. To the last point you mentioned about I think our last count as SANEF were about more than slightly above 30 of journalists that we lost. And during the period in which they calculated, we had only lost 2 journalists. But last year, then things came. When on the second and third wave, that's when we lost many journalists. We lost more than 30 journalists in South Africa. India alone lost over 240 journalists. Brazil, I'm countless. I'm talking about 300 plus. And it's been worse.
Yeah, let's remember the fact that there were thousands more lost, thousands of lives lost here in South Africa as well. Many people still mourning. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time. We really, really do appreciate it. Mr. Hopewell Khatebe there speaking to us from SANEF, and Professor Wallace Kuma from the University of Cape Town. So community radio, which is where I began, allows many brilliant broadcasters a chance to get started in the media space, but it's rare that you'd find a really gifted preteen behind the mic. Well, we recently visited a 12-year-old from my own old radio station, Alex FM. She's a 12-year-old presenter. Take a look at this.
You've just tuned into Alex FM 89.1. That was Molepe Lerato Flavor.
Born in Alexandra, north of Johannesburg, at just 12 years old, Bonolo Mwahludi is already a broadcaster. She says it began during the COVID-19 lockdown.
I started working here at Alex FM last year, but it all started in 2020 during COVID, when I was bored at home during lockdown level 5. Yeah, so I took my doll and my phone, and then I recorded a video of me doing a weather forecast with my doll. After showing it to my mom, she took it to Facebook. They said I actually am not bored, I have a talent, and I should do something with it. So she took it to SABC, which is now currently YDFM, an online radio station, and then last year that's how I came here to Alex FM.
Bonolo's program discusses complex issues that affect her peers.
The radio show, it's called Amplifiers here at Alex FM Momokasi. Yeah, and we talk about problems influencing the youth and young people. How we interact with our audience, we give them our WhatsApp number and our call number so they can interact with us. And the kind of topics we talk about is bullying, teenage pregnancy, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and other issues as well.
Producer and co-host Mpho Mokwebo says the intelligent young broadcaster is an amazing addition to the lineup.
She's very challenging because, yeah, she's one of those kids that she knows more. So every time it's like a challenging experience every day with her, every time whenever with her, because we know, but even if we give her a script and tell her, it's okay, this is what you're going to focus on, she always comes up with something new, and it's always like, oh, okay. Nice one. We didn't think of that. So it's always nice and challenging, and we always learn every time with Bonolo. I feel like everyone here at the station learns with Bonolo, and everyone enjoys listening to her on radio because she's always speaking bombs and something that you never expect for such a young kid to actually speak.
The job doesn't come without challenges, though.
With the issues that come with the show, it's the board, the desk. Oh, the desk, it's hard because you have to focus on air when talking, and you have to be busy with the buttons, and you have to make sure you're following the clock so it doesn't go faster than you.
I have to always be there in studio. So obviously I'm going to show her, this is, if you press this is for this mic, if you do this is for what and what, but I need to be there just for in case if she misses a button, I have to be there to make sure that she doesn't do that mistake, or if she did that mistake, we correct her.
It's people like Bonolo that Alex FM station manager Takalani Nemangowe says the station has to give an opportunity to.
When I saw her and I engaged her, she was with her mom, I saw talent. I'm very good in spotting talent because I've been in the space, community media space for some time. I saw that this is a talent that we can preserve. We need to give her a platform for her to be trained and grow within our ranks so that we can ready her for mainstream.
And with this kind of support, it's clear that the future is bright for this young star.
She is absolutely incredible. Can't wait to see what the future holds for her. Let's put up one more tweet just from our earlier discussion around how the media performed around COVID-19. Desley wrote this one. It says, this is system abuse by the government through the media. I'm not going to read the rest of that because I'm not sure where he's going. But it's very interesting that many people hold this view that the media only communicates the message of the government. Do you agree with that? Get in touch with us on social media, and we certainly will unpack those discussions every Sunday right here. Thank you so much for watching Media and Society. We hope you join us again, same time and same place next week. From me, Naledi Mulel, and the rest of the team, a good day and have yourselves a blessed Sunday.